Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So normally a homecoming is, it's a Hallmark movie.
Right.
You pull into the driveway after a long business trip, the porch light is on, the dog is wagging its tail, and your family just standing there at the door with open arms.
The dream scenario.
Exactly. It's a moment of arrival. It's closure. It's comforting. We really like to think that surviving the storm means you get to just relax by the fire.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of Homer's Odyssey, specifically this final act, and suddenly that porch light is just smashed.
Completely shattered.
Yeah, we're looking at a homecoming landscape that is, well, honestly, it's terrifying.
It is the absolute definition of a hostile takeover.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know the broad strokes of this epic, right? The 10 years fighting the Trojan War, the 10 years of brutal, wandering exile, just trying to get back.
Or the classic hero's journey.
Right. But what we're doing in this deep dive is looking at the final 6 books, 19 through 24. And we aren't just going to, recount the plot.
No, we want to explore the mechanisms of what is actually happening beneath the surface.
Exactly. Our goal is to act as your guides today, to extract the psychological truth, the moral insight, and, the practical application from what is arguably one of the most violent, emotional, and complex climaxes in ancient literature.
It really is. And just a quick contextual note for you listeners who might be used to the Greek names like Odysseus, Athena, or Zeus. In our deep dive today, we are exploring the text through the lens of its classic Latinized transmission.
Right, the Roman names.
Yeah, so you'll hear us use Ulysses, Minerva, and Jupiter. Because for centuries, this was actually how the epic permeated Western thought, literature, and art. The names are Romanized, but I promise the psychological depth remains profoundly Homeric. So Ulysses has finally returned to the island of Ithaca, but he doesn't arrive to a parade. He is disguised as this ragged, filthy beggar in his own home, and that home is currently overrun by over 100 arrogant suitors who are trying to force his wife, Penelope, to marry one of them.
Over 100 guys, and they are literally eating him out of house and home. I mean, they were slaughtering his livestock, they're draining his wine cellars, sleeping with his female servants, and openly plotting to murder his son Telemachus.
It's a complete powder keg.
It really is. And into this powder keg walks the rightful king, dressed in rags, forced to beg for crumbs at his own table. And that setup perfectly frames the core themes we're going to tear into today.
The immense, concentrated power of strategic restraint.
Yes, and the undeniable truth that our physical and emotional scars reveal about our identity.
Right, plus the catastrophic, inevitable cost of hubris.
And finally, the absolute necessity of having shared, immovable foundations if a relationship is going to survive the chaos of the real world.
So let's start with that internal battle. Because the fight Ulysses wages before any swords are drawn is arguably more intense than the physical battle that follows. We start in books 19 and 20.
Right.
Ulysses is a legendary warrior, a king, a man who conquered Troy through brilliant strategy, and he is now forcing himself to endure horrific humiliation in his own dining hall just to achieve a larger tactical goal.
We see this meticulous preparation begin at night. Ulysses and his son Telemachus are sneaking around the cloister, and they're systematically removing all the armor, the shields, the helmets, and the spears, and they're hiding them in the storeroom.
Prepping the battlefield.
Exactly. Telemachus makes the excuse to the servants that, the smoke from the fire is ruining the weapons, and that if a drunken brawl breaks out among the suitors, it's better they don't have blades handy.
It's a brilliant piece of cover because it relies on the suitors' own flaws, their drunkenness, and lack of discipline. It uses that to justify disarming them. And there's this beautiful, almost eerie cinematic detail in the text where the goddess Minerva walks before them with a golden lamp.
Oh, I love that part.
It makes the walls and rafters glow like fire. Telemachus is just amazed, but Ulysses tells him, hush, hold your peace, and ask no questions.
To that quiet, focused intensity. The board is being set. But then, the psychological torture really begins.
Yeah, the real test.
Ulysses is sitting by the fire in his disguise, and he is verbally assaulted by one of his own maidservants, Melantho. And this isn't just a random woman. This is a servant who was raised in this household, protected by Penelope, and yet she just rails at him.
She calls him a wretch.
Yeah, she accuses him of spying on the women and threatens to drive him out with a burning piece of wood. I mean, she has totally aligned herself with a hostile takeover.
And that betrayal cuts so deep, Ulysses warns her that he was once a rich man who gave to beggars, and that she should, beware lest she lose her place if the master returns.
But she just totally dismisses him.
She does. And this leads to a scene that I think perfectly captures the physiological reality of rage. In Book 20, Ulysses is lying awake on an undressed bullock's hide in the cloister. He cannot sleep.
Because of what he sees.
Exactly. He watches the maids, the women of his own household, sneaking out, giggling and laughing to go sleep with the suitors, the very men who are trying to ruin his family.
The text describes his internal state so vividly here, and it does it by totally bypassing intellect and going straight to biology. His heart, quote, growls within him.
Such a primal image.
It really is. Homer uses this incredible analogy. He says, as a bitch with puppies growls and shows her teeth when she sees a stranger, so did his heart growl with anger at the evil deeds that were being done. I mean, he wants to jump up and kill every single one of them right then and there.
And that analogy is so deliberate. In the ancient world, a dog wasn't just a pampered pet, right?
Right.
A dog was a working guardian, fiercely protective of its young. Homer is telling us that Ulysses' rage isn't just wounded pride. It is the deep biological instinct to protect his household.
His sympathetic nervous system is just screaming at him to act.
Exactly. His adrenaline is flooding his system. The fight or flight response is fully 100% engaged.
But he doesn't fight.
Yeah.
And he doesn't flee. He does something that I think is one of the most profound moments of self-regulation in all of literature.
It's amazing.
He physically beats his breast and says to himself, "Heart, be still. You had worse than this to bear on the day when the terrible Cyclops ate your brave companions, yet you bore it in silence till your cunning got you safe out of the cave, though you made sure of being killed."
He is literally commanding his own central nervous system to stand down. He chides his heart and checks it into endurance. And then he tosses and turns, which Homer compares to a man turning a paunch full of blood and fat over a hot fire, trying to get it cooked as fast as possible.
Wow.
He is burning up with the desire for action. The Greeks had a concept for this kind of restraint. It's called Metis, which means cunning intelligence or strategic calculation.
Okay.
And that's as opposed to bia, which is raw, brute force. He knows that if he gives into bia, if he strikes out of pure reactive anger in that moment, he'll be killed by sheer numbers and his family will be lost forever.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because we hear so much today in modern psychology and therapy culture about how detrimental it is to suppress your emotions, right? We are constantly told to speak our truth, to process our anger immediately, to set boundaries the second they are crossed.
That's very true.
So isn't bottling up that kind of intense, growling rage just going to eat a person alive? Doesn't it just make the eventual explosion worse and entirely uncontrollable?
That is a highly relevant modern concern for sure. But there is a crucial mechanism at play here that separates what Ulysses is doing from, toxic suppression.
What's the difference?
Ulysses is not suppressing his anger in the sense of denying that it exists. He isn't gaslighting himself into thinking everything is fine. He is fully acknowledging the rage. He literally feels his heart growling. But instead of letting that anger dictate his actions in the moment, he is channeling it.
Oh, he's putting it in a battery.
Exactly. Think of it in terms of physics. He is taking the kinetic energy of his anger, that urge to move, to strike, to scream, and he is consciously converting it into potential energy for a calculated strategy.
That makes a lot of sense.
Suppression is ignoring the emotion. Strategic patience is managing the emotion so that it serves your ultimate goal rather than sabotaging it. He knows that an uncalculated outburst will get him killed. The timing is just not right. The resources aren't in place.
And the abuse continues the very next day. The suitors are having a feast. A wealthy, arrogant suitor named Stysippus decides to give the stranger a twisted kind of present. He reaches into a meat basket, pulls out a bloody heifer's foot, and just hurls it right at Ulysses' head.
And this is the ultimate test of that potential energy. How does he react?
He just tilts his head slightly. He dodges it, and the text says he smiles a grim Sardinian smile. That detail always stops me cold. He doesn't yell, he doesn't throw it back. He just smiles this dark, knowing smile.
The Sardinian smile is such a fascinating historical detail. In antiquity, it was believed that a certain poisonous plant in Sardinia, when eaten, would cause a person's facial muscles to convulse into a grimace that looked like a smile right before they died.
That is so creepy.
Right. So a Sardinian smile is literally a smile of death. He is looking at Ctesippus and smiling because he knows exactly what is coming, and they don't.
But to fully grasp why the suitor's behavior is so objectively horrific, we really need to understand the ancient Greek geopolitical climate. Because, to a modern reader, throwing a cow's foot makes you a terrible house guest and an obnoxious jerk. But in this world, it's much darker than that.
Profoundly darker. We are talking about the sacred laws of hospitality, known as xenia.
Xenia, right.
In the Bronze Age Mediterranean, the geography was brutal. Rocky terrain, sudden violent sea storms, isolated city-states. There were no hotels, no embassies, no police forces.
No safety net at all.
Exactly. If you were traveling and a storm blew your ship off course, your survival depended entirely on the kindness of strangers taking you in.
So hospitality wasn't just about being polite. It was a literal manner of life and death.
Precisely. And because it was so vital to human survival, the Greeks believed it was protected by Jupiter himself. Jupiter was the patron god of strangers and suppliants. The rules of xenia were strict. If a stranger arrived at your door, you had to invite them in, bathe them, feed them, and offer them gifts before you even asked their name. Because that stranger could be a god in disguise, testing your morality.
Which means the suitors aren't just being bad guests. They are violating the foundational moral code of their entire civilization.
Completely.
By eating a man's wealth in his absence, by attempting to coerce his wife, and by physically assaulting a beggar under his roof, they are committing a profound sacrilege. The original audience listening to this epic wouldn't just think the suitors were rude. They'd understand that these men were acting like a societal contagion that demanded divine and total retribution.
Yes, it was universally understood.
So when you think about applying this today, it really shifts how we view our own reactions. We obviously aren't dodging flying cow hooves, hopefully, but we do find ourselves in environments that feel incredibly hostile.
All the time.
Think about being in a toxic workplace, where a boss consistently takes credit for your work, or a colleague openly disrespects you in a meeting, or maybe it's a deeply dysfunctional family dynamic where you're constantly provoked. The natural human instinct is to react immediately.
To defend your ego.
Right, to lash out, to match their aggression with your own.
But Ulysses reframes restraint. In our modern world, we often view silence or holding our tongue as a sign of weakness or submission, We think if we don't snap back, we've lost. But Ulysses shows us that strategic restraint is actually a form of concentrated, terrifying power.
The challenge for you, the listener, is creating that micropause between the trigger and the response. When that inflammatory email comes in, instead of firing off a furious reply, the practice is saying, "Heart, be still," closing the laptop and waiting 24 hours.
Right.
It's about channeling that reactive energy into a long-term strategy that actually solves the problem, rather than just releasing the pressure in a way that gets you fired or ostracized.
Restraint as a weapon. But what's really fascinating is that while Ulysses has absolute ironclad control over his actions and his tongue, there are physical realities about his history that he cannot hide.
The body keeps the score.
Exactly. Which brings us to the impossibility of maintaining a disguise forever.
The body absolutely betrays the mind. And this happens in Book 19, right before the internal monologue we just discussed. Ulysses, still in his beggar disguise, has a long conversation with his wife, Penelope, by the fire.
And she doesn't recognize him.
She doesn't, though he gives her a lot of subtle hints. He tells her a completely fabricated story about who he is, claiming to be a man from Crete who once entertained Ulysses.
And his lie is incredibly detailed. He describes exactly what Ulysses was wearing 20 years ago. A purple wool mantle, a gold brooch depicting a dog strangling a fawn, a shirt that fit like the dry skin of an onion.
Such a specific detail.
Penelope is weeping as she hears this. Her heart is just melting, and the text notes that Ulysses felt profound pity for her. But he kept his eyes as hard as horn or iron without letting them so much as quiver. More of that insane, calculated restraint.
Eventually, Penelope orders her old nurse, Euryclea, to wash the beggar's feet as a sign of hospitality. Now, Euryclea is a vital character. She was Ulysses' nurse when he was a baby. She literally raised him.
She knows him better than anyone.
Yeah, and she looks at the beggar and says, "I have never seen anyone who looks so much like Ulysses in figure, voice, and feet as you do."
He is playing an incredibly dangerous game here. And as Euryclea begins to wash him, Ulysses suddenly realizes he has made a fatal miscalculation. He turns abruptly away from the light of the fire because he remembers a physical truth. He has a massive, unmistakable scar on his leg.
Oh, right.
And he knows that the moment her hands run over it, the entire disguise will collapse.
And the narrative brilliantly flashes back to tell us the story of this specific scar. He got it as a young man during a wild boar hunt on Mount Parnassus. He was visiting his grandfather, Autolycus, who the text hilariously notes was the most accomplished thief and perjurer in the whole world.
Autolycus is a highly symbolic figure. When Ulysses was born, it was Autolycus who named him. And the etymology of the name he chose is deeply significant. Autolycus says, "I am highly displeased with the large number of people in one place and another, both men and women. So name the child Ulysses, or the child of anger."
The child of anger, or in some Greek translations of Odysseus, the man of pain.
Right.
The one who causes pain and the one who suffers it.
Exactly. His very identity is wrapped up in enduring and inflicting hardship. And it is with this grandfather's family that the young Ulysses goes hunting. They find a massive boar in a dense, dark thicket. The boar charges, and before Ulysses can strike a lethal blow with his spear, the boar hooks him, ripping his leg open above the knee with its tusk, leaving a deep, jagged gash. Ulysses kills the boar, his uncles bind the wound and use a chant to stop the bleeding, and he carries that raised scar tissue for the rest of his life.
So, cut back to the present moment in the dining hall. Euryclea has the scarred limb in her hands. She feels the scar, and instantly she drops his foot.
Yeah.
The leg falls into the bronze bath, the cauldron rings out, water spills everywhere. She touches his beard and says, "My dear child, I am sure you must be Ulysses himself, only I did not know you till I had actually touched and handled you."
It's a breathtaking moment. She doesn't recognize him by his face because time and the elements have weathered it.
Right.
She doesn't recognize him by his clothes, which are rags, or even his voice, which he is disguising. She recognizes him by his wound. Our truest identity is often recorded in our wounds, not our words.
That concept hits so hard today. I mean, we live in a culture that is absolutely obsessed with the polished surface. We relentlessly curate our social media profiles. We refine our LinkedIn resumes. We practice our elevator pitches until they are flawless.
It's all about the image.
It is. We build these elaborate, impenetrable disguises of competence and success, just like Ulysses built his disguise as a beggar with a highly plausible backstory.
But the text is revealing a deeper psychological truth here. True recognition, true intimacy doesn't come from the resume. It comes from the scar.
Yeah.
The scar is the physical and emotional evidence that you have lived in the real world, that you have faced the wild boar, whether that represents a failed business, a brutal divorce, a health crisis, or a deep personal trauma, and that you survived it.
Yes.
It is the indelible mark of your history, your failures, and your hard-won lessons.
People ultimately connect with our vulnerabilities, not our victories. But there is a deeply uncomfortable obstacle in this scene that we absolutely have to address. Because the moment Euryclea recognizes him, it is not a sweet, tearful reunion.
No, it is shockingly violent and paranoid.
Penelope's attention is diverted by Minerva, so she doesn't see what's happening. And Ulysses ruthlessly grabs his own beloved nurse, the woman who nursed him at her breast. He grabs her by the throat with his right hand, pulls her close, and threatens to kill her.
It's awful.
He says, "If heaven grants me to take the lives of these suitors, I will not spare you, though you are my own nurse, when I am killing the other women." Grabbing her by the throat, I mean, it feels completely deranged.
It is deranged if you look at it from the perspective of a peacetime civilian. But from a neurological standpoint, this is a textbook trauma response.
Really?
Yes, his amygdala has been completely hijacked. Ulysses has spent 20 years surviving through deception, constant vigilance, and extreme violence. The neuroplasticity of his brain has been reshaped by war.
Oh, I see.
He is experiencing profound hyperarousal. Trauma has rewired him to view literally everyone as a potential liability. He cannot afford trust. His survival depends on absolute secrecy, and in his heightened state, even a loving mother figure is perceived as a lethal threat to his mission the moment she breaks his cover.
It's tragic. He is physically home, but psychologically he is still waist deep in the Trojan War. The disguise is protecting his physical body from the suitors, but it's also isolating him from the people who actually love him.
Exactly.
And that brings up a really tough reflection for anyone navigating modern relationships. Who in your life has earned the right to see your scars? Are you hiding your authentic self behind a disguise of extreme competence or a fake backstory because you are terrified of being vulnerable?
We all have that wild boar hunt in our past. We all have the marks where life tore into us. And while we certainly shouldn't show those scars to everyone, I mean, you wouldn't show them to the hostile suitors of the world.
Right, obviously not.
But true connection requires that we allow the trusted few, the Eurocleas in our lives, to touch the places where we have been broken and healed.
But eventually, the disguise has to come off entirely. The preparation finally meets the opportunity. The kinetic energy is released. Which brings us to books 21 and 22, the tipping point and the devastating cost of hubris.
This is the climax the entire epic has been building toward. The tension that has been stored up through all this patience finally snaps. Penelope, guided by Minerva, decides to force the issue. She goes to the heavily guarded storeroom, gets her husband's great bow, a weapon left behind from a past friendship, and she brings it out to the suitors along with 12 iron axes.
She announces the test. She says she will marry whichever man can most easily string the mighty bow of Ulysses and then shoot an arrow clean through the handle holes of all 12 axes lined up in a row. Now, to understand the mechanics of this, we need to know why this isn't just a simple archery contest.
Right. This isn't a standard wooden longbow. This is a composite bow, a weapon made of a complex lamination of horn, wood, and animal sinew.
It's intense.
Stringing a composite bow of this magnitude doesn't just require skill. It requires immense, almost superhuman physical strength to bend the rigid horn and sinew backward against its natural curve. It is an impossible task for anyone but the true master of the weapon.
The suitors, totally blinded by their own egos, think it's just a game. They set up the axes. Telemachus actually tries first, and he almost strings it on his fourth try. But Ulysses gives him a subtle, secret signal to stop. Telemachus is coming into his own power, but he defers to his father's timing.
Then the suitors take their turns. The first to try is Leodes, the sacrificial priest. He can't even bend it. His hands are soft, completely unused to hard labor. He gives up and actually prophesies, rather ominously, that the bow will take the life of many a chief.
Antinous, the most arrogant of the suitors, just mocks him. But they realize they are in trouble, so they decide to cheat.
Of course they do.
They light a fire, they bring out a great ball of lard, and they try to heat and grease the bow to make the stiff horn and sinew more pliable. It's a desperate, ignorant move, and even with the heat and grease, none of them are nearly strong enough to string it.
And while this humiliating failure is happening, Ulysses slips outside the hall and reveals his identity to two of his loyal servants, Eumaeus the swineherd and Philoctetes the stockman.
How does he prove it?
He proves who he is by showing them the boar scar. He secures their loyalty, and he gives them highly specific tactical orders. Lock the outer courtyard gates, and tell the women to lock their doors and ignore any screaming they hear. The kill box is being sealed.
Ulysses goes back inside. The suitors are failing miserably. Eurymachus, one of the leaders, is absolutely devastated. And what's fascinating is that he isn't crying because he loses Penelope. He says he's devastated because failing to string the bow proves to the whole world that they are physically inferior to Ulysses.
All about their ego.
A massive blow to their fragile, toxic egos.
Then the filthy beggar asks for a turn.
And the suitors lose their minds. They are terrified he might actually do it and make them look like fools in front of everyone.
Yeah.
Antinous threatens to ship him off to a vicious king who will cut him to pieces. But Penelope insists the stranger be given a chance, though Telemachus steps up, asserts his authority as master of the house, and orders his mother to go upstairs to her room.
Which is a crucial tactical move, right? Getting her safely out of the crossfire. Then the bow is handed to Ulysses. And Homer slows the narrative down beautifully here.
It's so cinematic.
It is. Ulysses examines the weapon, turning it over, checking if worms have eaten the horns while he was away. The suitors are laughing at him, calling him tricky old bow fancier.
And then, with zero effort, he strings it. The text says he strung it as easily as a skilled bard strings a new peg of his lyre. It's effortless. He plucks the string, and it sings sweetly, like the twittering of a swallow.
The psychological impact of that sound is immediate. The suitors turn pale, Jupiter thunders loudly from heaven, Ulysses takes an arrow, remains seated, draws the string, and shoots the arrow perfectly through all 12 axe heads.
The test is passed. The disguise is dead. And immediately the slaughter begins. Ulysses strips off his rags, springs onto the broad pavement at the threshold blocking the only main exit, and announces that the mighty contest is at an end.
He aims his first arrow at Antinous.
And this detail is so brutally cinematic. Antinous is just about to take a sip of wine from a two-handled gold cup. He has absolutely no thought of death.
Yeah.
Why would he? He is Arrogant, comfortable, completely entitled. The arrow strikes him right in the throat, going clean through his neck.
Just brutal.
He drops the cup, kicks the table over in his death throes, and his blood soils the bread and roasted meats on the floor.
The suitors are in an absolute uproar. They leap up, looking for weapons on the walls. But remember, Ulysses and Telemachus removed all the armor the night before.
Right, they're defenseless.
They are trapped in the Megaron, the Great Hall, with no shields, no spears, facing a master archer who has blocked the door. Eurymachus tries to negotiate. He admits they did wrong, but he cowardly blames it all on the dead Antinous. He offers to pay Ulysses back with massive fines of oxen, gold, and bronze.
But Ulysses glares at him and delivers this chilling line. He says, "Though you should give me all that you have in the world, I will not stay my hand till I have paid all of you in full." It is absolute, uncompromising justice. Eurymachus draws his sword and charges, and Ulysses shoots him right in the liver. He dies kicking a stool.
And from there, it descends into a chaotic, brutal, closed-quarters massacre. Telemachus runs to the storeroom to get armor for the four of them. A treacherous goatherd named Melanthius manages to sneak into the storeroom through a vent and gets weapons for the suitors, suddenly making it a real, desperately dangerous battle.
Oh, man.
But with the tactical help of Minerva, who deflects the suitors' spears, Ulysses and his small team systematically kill every single suitor in the hall.
It is a complete bloodbath.
Okay.
The text describes the suitors lying in the dust, weltering in their blood like fishes netted out of the sea and thrown on a beach, gasping until the sun bakes them alive.
We do.
We promised at the beginning of this deep dive not to blindly endorse everything in this ancient text. And what happens immediately after the battle is deeply unsettling to a modern conscience.
Yes. While the death of the suitors in battle is framed as divine justice, the executions that follow are horrific. Ulysses calls the old nurse Euryclea and asks her to identify which of the 50 female servants have misconducted themselves by sleeping with the suitors and betraying the household. She identifies 12.
And Ulysses orders these 12 women to carry out the bloody, heavy, dead bodies of their lovers, to scrub the coagulated blood off the tables and chairs with sponges, and to shovel the blood-soaked dirt from the floor. And when the hall is clean, Telemachus takes them out into a narrow alleyway.
And instead of giving them a quick, honorable death by the sword, Telemachus strings up a ship's cable and hangs all 12 women at once.
It's so hard to read.
The imagery Homer uses is stomach-turning. He compares them to thrushes or doves beating against a net. Their feet move convulsively for a while, and then they die. Following this, they take the treacherous goatherd Melanthius, drag him into the courtyard, cut off his nose and ears, tear out his vitals to feed to the dogs raw, and hack off his hands and feet.
It's collective execution. It's mutilation. I read this and my modern conscience just completely rejects it. How do we extract any kind of wisdom from a scene of such grotesque brutality?
This is where we have to do the hard work of separating enduring wisdom from the limited, often brutal social assumptions of the ancient world. To understand the brutality, we have to look at the ancient concept of miasma.
Miasma.
Yeah, which translates roughly to pollution or blood guilt. In ancient Greek culture, honor and betrayal weren't just abstract ideas. They were viewed almost like physical contagions. The maids were killed not just because they had sex, but because in the ancient, deeply patriarchal mindset, they had allied themselves with the enemy and spiritually polluted the household. Melanthius wasn't just a traitor. He was a cancer that had to be brutally excised.
So it was viewed as a ritual cleansing rather than just a punishment.
Exactly. We, as modern listeners, can and should recognize the horror of that literal physical brutality inflicted on the vulnerable servants. But the enduring wisdom that survives underneath the ancient gore is the immutable law of consequence. Hubris, that arrogant pride that ignores the rights of others and flouts the laws of the universe, inevitably leads to a catastrophic fall.
The consequences catch up to you.
The suitors believed they were completely untouchable. They confused Ulysses' absence for a lack of consequence.
It's incredibly similar to Eastern wisdom traditions surrounding the concept of karma. In a karmic sense, Ulysses is almost just the instrument of the universe. The suitors weren't just killed by bronze arrows. They were crushed by the inevitable accumulated weight of their own gluttony, their arrogance, and their relentless disrespect.
Yeah, they authored their own doom the very moment they decided to abuse the sacred laws of hospitality.
They thought because the master wasn't immediately punishing them, he would never punish them. And that is the definition of hubris, the belief that the rules of reality do not apply to you.
When you think about that level of hubris, it's not just an ancient problem. We do this all the time. It's so easy to judge the suitors as cartoon villains, but Where are we arrogant in our own lives?
Right, where are we taking things for granted?
Where are you taking a situation, a relationship, or a physical resource for granted? We all have areas where we act like the suitors, assuming the master of the house, whether that is reality, a physical consequence, or just the limits of another person's patience, will never return to hold us accountable. The Odyssey teaches us that the rules always apply, eventually. The universe always balances the ledger.
It does. But once the ledger is balanced and the physical threat is neutralized, the real work of rebuilding begins, which moves us out of the blood and noise of the Great Hall and into the psychological climax of the story.
The quiet after the storm.
Exactly. The hall is clean, the house is purified with burning sulfur, and we enter Book 23, the search for the immovable center.
Euryclea runs upstairs to wake Penelope and tell her the impossible news. Ulysses is home, he has the scar, and he has killed all the suitors. Penelope simply doesn't believe it. She thinks the old nurse is mad, or that some immortal god has killed the suitors to punish them for their wickedness, and that Ulysses is dead somewhere far away. She comes down to the hall and sits opposite him by the fire.
And she just stares at him. She sits in absolute silence. Telemachus is furious with her. He berates his mother, saying she has a heart as hard as stone. I mean, he is young and literal. He can't believe she isn't throwing her arms around a man who has been gone for 20 years and just saved their lives.
But Penelope is incredibly wise. She responds that she is lost in astonishment. But she adds this brilliant line. She says, "If he really is Ulysses, we shall get to understand one another better by and by, for there are tokens with which we two are alone acquainted and which are hidden from all others."
This is where we see a concept the Greeks called homophrosin, right? Which means like-mindedness or a profound intellectual and spiritual partnership. She is an absolute intellectual match for Ulysses. She knows that in a world where gods can shapeshift and men are infinitely deceitful, appearances mean absolutely nothing.
Ulysses takes a bath, puts on fresh clothes, and Minerva makes him look like an immortal. Taller, stronger, with hair flowing down like hyacinth blossoms. He looks like a perfect king. He sits back down, but Penelope still doesn't melt. She remains stone-faced.
She won't budge.
Ulysses gets frustrated and tells the nurse to make a bed for him in the hall to sleep alone, because his wife clearly has a heart of iron.
And this is where Penelope lays her brilliant ultimate trap. She says to the nurse, "Euryclea, take his bed outside the bedchamber that he himself built. Bring the bed outside this room and put bedding upon it."
She tells the servant to move the master's bed. And Ulysses just erupts. He loses his temper completely. For the first time in the entire epic, he demands to know who could possibly move that bed unless they cut down the tree.
Because the construction of that bed is their ultimate secret. Ulysses explains that he built their bedroom around a massive living olive tree that was growing in the courtyard. He cut off the top branches, shaped the trunk into a bedpost, and built the entire bed around it.
It's literally rooted to the ground.
The bed is rooted deep into the earth. It cannot be moved without destroying the very foundation of the house itself.
And the moment he reveals this incredibly specific architectural secret, a secret only the two of them and one single servant have ever known, Penelope finally breaks. She flies to him, weeping, throws her arms around his neck, and kisses him. The text has this stunning analogy. It says, "He was as welcome to her as the sight of firm, dry land is to shipwrecked sailors who have been battered by the waves and covered in brine."
It is a profoundly moving reunion, precisely because it is earned. And the core wisdom here is so beautiful. True partnership, true relationship requires a foundation that is deeply rooted, living, and immovable.
The olive tree isn't just a piece of timber. It's a living organism renowned in the Mediterranean for surviving droughts, harsh winds, and centuries of time.
The olive tree bed represents the secret architecture of a relationship. It's the inside jokes, the shared struggles, the private vows, the late-night conversations that form the bedrock of a long-term partnership. It is the secret language that only two people share. Anyone can put on the appearance of being a good partner,
Right, anyone can wear the right clothes or say the right things initially.
But Penelope didn't trust the external appearance. She trusted his knowledge of their private foundation.
The olive tree is something that takes years to grow, and it cannot be easily uprooted or replicated. When you look at your own life or your closest relationships, you have to ask yourself, what is your immovable center? What is the core value, the shared truth, or the fundamental commitment that you have built your life around?
That's such a good question for you to ask yourself.
It's vital to identify that, because if your foundation can be easily dragged out of the room by a passing trend or a moment of stress, it's not an olive tree, it's just furniture.
But as deeply satisfying as that reunion is, the story doesn't end in the bedroom. While the personal resolution is achieved, the societal fallout of the massacre is just beginning outside. Which brings us to Book 24, Generational Cycles of Violence and the Excruciating Choice of Peace.
Book 24 deals with the grim aftermath. We briefly visit the underworld, Hades, where the ghosts of the suitors arrive, squeaking like bats, and explain their fate to the ghosts of Agamemnon and Achilles.
Quite the scene down there.
Agamemnon actually praises Penelope's faithfulness, contrasting it with his own wife who murdered him in his bath when he returned from Troy. But back on Earth, among the living, the violence is threatening to spiral out of control.
Ulysses leaves the town and goes out to the country to find his aging father, Laertes. Laertes has been living in absolute misery, essentially working as a slave in his own orchard, wearing dirty, patched clothes and a goatskin cap, grieving the loss of his son. Ulysses finds this frail old man hoeing a vine.
And here we encounter one of the most difficult, debated obstacles to growth for the modern reader. Ulysses doesn't just run up and hug his grieving father.
No, he decides to test him. It is excruciating to read. He pretends to be a stranger from a foreign land. He tells Laertes a fabricated, detailed story about hosting Ulysses years ago, and essentially tells the old man that Ulysses is probably dead and eaten by fishes.
It's so harsh.
Laertes is devastated. He pours dirt over his own head and groans heavily. Only then, when his father is in absolute visible agony, does Ulysses reveal himself, showing the boar scar and listing the exact number of apple, pear, and fig trees Laertes gave him when he was a little boy.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
I have to push back hard on this because why on earth would he torture his grieving old dad like that? It feels completely sociopathic. There's no tactical need for it. The suitors are dead. He is on a quiet farm.
Yeah.
Why play this cruel mind game with a broken old man?
It is deeply uncomfortable. But from a psychological standpoint, this scene reveals the profound tragedy of the veteran. As we discussed with Euryclea, Ulysses has been surviving through deception, disguise, and testing people for 2 decades.
Oh, the trauma rewiring again.
Yes. The neuroplasticity of 20 years of war has literally rewired him. He cannot turn the Metis, the cunning calculation, off. The survival mechanism has become his default mode of operation. Even with a safe, loving family member in a quiet orchard, his instinct is to manipulate and verify before trusting. It shows us that returning home physically doesn't mean you are instantly healed psychologically. The war comes home with you.
And the literal war is coming to the farm. Back in the city, the families of the dead suitors have gathered. Eupeithes, the father of the first suitor killed, Antinomus rallies the townspeople. He demands they avenge the murder of their sons and brothers. They arm themselves and march out to Laertes' farm to kill Ulysses.
And this brings up the historical reality of the blood feud. In this pre-state ancient culture, justice wasn't handled by a police force or a court system. If someone killed your family member, honor dictated that you had to kill them back to balance the cosmic and social ledger.
An eye for an eye.
It didn't matter if your son was a wicked suitor who deserved it. The shedding of blood demanded more blood.
Which creates an endless loop of violence. A generational cycle of retaliation. The families march on the farm. Ulysses, Telemachus, and old Laertes put on their armor. Minerva gives Laertes a burst of supernatural strength, and the old man throws a spear that goes right through the bronze helmet of Eupeithes, killing him instantly.
The father of Ulysses kills the father of the worst suitor. The cycle is literally continuing right before our eyes. The two sides clash, and it's about to turn into a full-blown civil war that will annihilate the entire population of Ithaca.
But before it can escalate, divine intervention stops it. The goddess Minerva, acting with the blessing of Jupiter, steps in. She drops a blazing thunderbolt of fire between the two armies. She commands them in a loud, terrifying voice to cease this dreadful war and settle the matter without further bloodshed.
And she enforces a covenant of peace. The text says she causes them to forgive and forget the massacre. It's a collective, divinely enforced amnesia. They drop their weapons, pale with fear, and flee back to the city. Peace is restored not by fighting to the bitter end until one side is victorious, but by a higher power shutting the conflict down entirely.
When we look at this through a modern lens, it's really about breaking generational trauma and endless cycles of retaliation. In our lives, we often find ourselves locked in feuds, whether it's a bitter family estrangement over an inheritance, a nasty corporate lawsuit, or deeply polarized political hatred. We feel entirely justified in our anger. We want perfect justice. We want the other side to pay for what they did.
But the Odyssey is telling us that seeking perfect justice through endless retaliation just leaves everyone dead. Sometimes peace requires an intervention from our higher nature, represented here by Minerva.
A thunderbolt moment.
Yes. It requires a thunderbolt moment where we simply say, enough. It forces us to lay down our weapons and accept a covenant of peace, even when we feel our vengeance is entirely justified. Because the alternative is the destruction of our own peace of mind and the community around us.
That is the ultimate challenge. Is there a conflict in your life right now where you are waiting for perfect justice, where you are demanding that the other side bleed before you can move on? What if what you actually need is to accept a covenant of peace? What if you need to be the one to drop the weapon, absorb the unfairness of it, and break the cycle so you can actually move forward with your life?
It is the hardest choice a human being can make, which is exactly why Homer suggests it requires almost divine strength to do it.
We've covered massive ground today. From the blistering physiological restraint in the dining hall to the terrifying vulnerability of the scar, we've looked at the horrific, inevitable cost of hubris, the immovable nature of a true relationship rooted like an olive tree, and the desperate necessity of breaking the cycle of violence. But before we wrap up, what is the final thought we should leave the listener with? Because the story actually doesn't end with this peace treaty.
It doesn't. There is a fascinating, almost haunting detail buried back in Book 23 during the reunion of Ulysses and Penelope. Even after 20 years of fighting, suffering, and navigating monsters to get back to his own bed, Ulysses tells his wife that his journey is not actually over.
Wait, he has to leave again after all that.
Yes. He reveals a prophecy given to him by the blind seer Tiresias when he visited the underworld years earlier. Tiresias told him that after he kills the suitors, he must eventually take an oar from his ship, put it on his shoulder, and walk inland. He has to walk so far from the sea that he finds a people who know absolutely nothing of the ocean, who don't even mix salt with their food.
That's incredibly far inland.
And when a traveler asks him why he is carrying a winnowing shovel on his shoulder, mistaking the oar for a farming tool used to separate wheat from chaff, that is where he must plant the oar in the ground and make a final sacrifice to the gods. Only then will he find a gentle death in his old age.
That gives me chills. After all that immense effort to get back to his past, to reclaim his old house, his old title, and his old life, his ultimate peace isn't found there.
No, it isn't. It suggests that true lasting peace is not found by simply returning to who you used to be or desperately trying to reclaim what was lost. The prophecy demands that he take the instrument of his struggle, the oar that rode him through 20 years of trauma, storms, and war, and venture into entirely new, unknown territory.
A complete transformation.
He has to carry the heavy weight of his past until it is transformed into something new, until a weapon of the sea is recognized as a tool of the earth. We don't find peace by going backward. We find it by carrying our experiences forward into the unknown and allowing them to take on a new purpose.
The porch light might be smashed, but you take the wood from the ruined door and build something entirely new. That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.